Hey guys, it's Dash Zach back with another review, this time of the MCHOSE A60 Pro. It's a solid iterative upgrade on their original A60 that brings their specs into the modern era with 8K polling, 0.01 rapid trigger, and all the top specs you'd be looking for, and a keyboard. Bringing it back here, you can see this is a direct competitor to the Wooting 60HE in that small form factor, really based on performance. If I were to look into a Wooting competitor on Amazon right now that came in at a very fair price, this would be right at the top of my list. But do you agree with that take? And is this the right 60% Hall effect keyboard for you? Let's find out. So here we have it, the MCHOSE A60 Pro, clearly a direct competitor to the Wooting 60HE, but at less than one half the price. You can see here from the 60% layout, the very basic bare bones design of the keyboard. They're going all for performance here, and I commend them for that. They had an earlier version of this 860 that wasn't quite up to snuff as far as performance and specs. Now let's go check out why that was now. So as you can see here, the old A60 had specs that aren't quite on par with what we expect top rapid trigger keyboards these days. 0.5 millisecond latency due to that 1K polling rate. Only a 16K scan rate, but that's not as big of a deal. It comes down to the firmware implementation rather than the raw advertised numbers, in my opinion. It did have all the functionality you would want with rapid trigger, rapid snappy, SOCD, blah, blah, blah. They upgraded the positioning plate from just metal to aluminum, apparently, added some RGB, and most importantly, initially had many different switches available for this keyboard. Based on their current site and Amazon, it appears that only the TTC Uranus, or Uranus, not sure why I said Uranus there, specifically these standard ones here, are the option that you get. As far as these go, they have a total travel of 3.4 millimeters. Their initial operating force is 32 plus or minus 6 GF, which is on the lighter side. Not the absolute lightest, but definitely pretty light, which I will talk about later. And then 100 million life cycle. No one really ever hits that. Have you ever really seen your switches stop working? No. Well, maybe you have, but I haven't. Based off of these specs listed here, if I were to give it a choice, I probably would have gone with their customized crystal magnetic switches. But to be fair, I'm not sure what those are based on. And TTC is a pretty reputable brand, so I'm not mad to have had the Uranuses here. And for those who are curious, here's a quick look at the layers in the keyboard. You've got that aluminum alloy positioning plate, a layer of silicone, the flex cap PCB, another silicone bottom, and then the bottom of the case. And those are your overall layers of the keyboard and your sound considerations. Going back to what I said, visually, obviously very bare bones, 60%, no knob, no screen, all plastic construction. Not a lot of crazy flex here. Gasket mounted, as we stated, as is a trend, which I've noticed with MCHOSE keyboards. Zero give or flex here when you press down on the keys. There is no give here at all, which in my mind is a little less toward typing feel and a little more towards raw performance. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Taking a peek at the keycaps here, I never had much interesting to say here about the keycaps, but double shot PBT and shine through, which I enjoy and looks really good with the RGB. You'll see here in a second. And then we have these TTC Uranus switches, dark blue on the bottom, clear throughout the top, very wide box stem here. A little bit more wobble than I've seen on other switches. And I'll demonstrate here for you the wobble on the actual keycaps themselves. Not actually concerned. As you can see here, pretty steady, nothing too crazy. And for what it's worth, in my opinion, a pretty sick looking switch. I really like these. As is typical for me, I'll whip out my heavy duty package scale here that goes up to 110 pounds. This comes in at 1 pound, 7.7 ounces, or 672 grams. So very light, a little bit lighter even than the HE80 from Epicmaker. Both very light, all plastic construction keyboards. This being a little bit lighter, due purely to the form factor. And now I'm going to take a look here at the RGB, making sure I'm not clicked on OBS because I need to just plug this into my computer. And I have in fact hit spacebar and accidentally stopped recording and missed large chunks of what I thought was the video previously. Anyway, as you might be able to pick up here on the video, the RGB on this is a little bit more pastel, I would say. It's a little bit on the lighter side, not quite as like deep and rich. It'd be sort of like looking at a normal TN panel versus like an OLED monitor as far as the comparison with the lighting on the AL65, for example, that I just reviewed. But overall, it's fine. I'm very glad that they include double shot PBT, shine through keycaps, as I really prefer shine through keycaps these days, unless I'm looking at designer keycaps. And that's pretty much all there is for the RGB. As far as the 60% form factor goes, I'm personally not a fan. I did want to check out this keyboard just to see how the Pro fared versus the original. But again, I'm someone who really wants dedicated arrow keys down here. I want that delete key, not just the backspace key up here. And I do enjoy something like a knob. Screens are cool, I guess, if you have them, but not really a preference of mine. And I also do prefer the function row. So really, again, 60% not great for me. I did, however, remain a Wooting 60HE for over a year and definitely got used to it. I would just assign these 4 keys here with mod tap to the arrow keys, which was fine and functional, but would occasionally cause me to do stuff I did not want to do with how I had those keys bound. So again, 60% not a layout that I would have made myself, but perfectly fine. And if you want the most space possible on your desk, if you want to have something that feels just like a Wooting 60HE, this is the form factor for you. As I'm sitting here waiting for the web software to load, because occasionally in Chrome it just does not agree, I did have a thought pop into my mind, and that's I may have an unusual way of testing keyboards in that I typically get them, use them dedicated for like 5 to 7 days, and I usually let them sit for a bit, maybe use them on and off here or there. And I will say there is an aspect to my review and my impression that when I come back to actually do the review, I mess around with it like day of, hour of even, and it does change my impression a little bit sometimes. sometimes because I've been testing other keyboards in between. And coming back to this really puts a good perspective. We have a 504 gateway timeout. What the? All right, apparently I'm just a moron and I had a bad URL. Let's pair this thing up. Theoretically, took a bit to load there. Here we are. You may have been familiar with this if you've seen my Jet 75 review, but we'll run through the whole thing again. Seems like there's a keyboard firmware upgrade that's come out in the last week since I rotated off of this keyboard. Random page reload. Anyway, Flower Dance, always my lighting of choice. I turn the speed all the way down, max the brightness. Trigger settings I was messing around with. As you can see, I actually had the individual rapid trigger settings turned up a bit on these keys here, WASD, just to mess around in space to test something that I ran into here. But I also was running a 0 dead zone. So I'm going to do an aside here as I talk about the software. I did have a weird issue with this keyboard where if you went to absolute minimum sensitivity for release and press on these keys, specifically the space bar, and I know they don't suggest that, but like it's marketed that way and that's how they tout the keyboard, so you're going to want to try that. So anyway, those settings plus continuous rapid trigger, no dead zone, and then performance wise, if you flipped on Berserk 2.0 to 0.005, I was getting a bunch of accidental key presses, double presses. I think it had something to do with me holding the key. Like if you hold the key down for more than just exactly what you need for the press, it would double press the space bar specifically. And this was even with stability mode on. So do note that. I also did have key repetition optimization on at that point, and I had flipped that off just as I was playing around with different settings. But essentially this goes into the point that I've made many times before, is that having absolute minimum actuation, absolute lowest sensitivity for rapid trigger is stupid because you would just end up pressing things you don't want to and actuating things way before you intend to. It causes problems. I think the settings I ended up using that were really effective for this was 0.1 for the activation, 0.05, 0.1, something in that range for the sensitivity here. I don't remember exactly what it was. I cranked this way up just when I was messing around. But if you crank this down here to something like this, it wasn't nearly as much of an issue as I had before with my double clicking the space specifically. So just something to look out for here. And for what it's worth, the A68 Air, which is like their pro version of the A68, basically it's like the spec upgrade for the A68 as well. I ran into the same issue with the spacebar when you put absolute minimum settings on. So just don't do those absolute minimum settings. They're not required. They're there, I guess. And this Berserk mode does work. There's even a Berserk mode with a 0.001 on the Mix87 that I'm testing right now, but they just seem completely unnecessary to me. Besides that, like I've pretty much walked through this entire page now. You can set the dead zone, all the rapid trigger settings here, remap your keys, advanced keys is SOCD. I did do a firmware upgrade right before I stopped using this the last time, so it does look like there have been multiple firmware upgrades, which is good to see from MCHOSE. Also not running the issue that some other people have mentioned where they brick their MCHOSE products when upgrading firmware. Just not a problem I've run into. Fully functional software, probably the second best web software there is in the industry to Wooting as far as I've seen. They may be better on keyboards that I've not tested, but for the ones I've tested, this is really good. I did do all my testing on 8K polling. I played back and forth with this key repetition optimization. Not sure what my overall thoughts are on this, to be honest with you, because it's not entirely clear what it's doing under the hood. I felt this keyboard was very, very performant and responsive turning off Berserk Mode 2.0, which just defaults you to 0.01 millimeters, which again, if you think about what the distance is of that on a keycap or on a key press, you really don't need more than 0.01. Going beyond that is just unnecessary in my opinion. And then I ran the whole time with dynamic calibration and I kept stability mode on as well. And that did not really seem to affect my performance all that much. So just to recap some of those thoughts there on performance, it's interesting that you can make this keyboard almost too sensitive where it doesn't perform the way you want it to. But on that note, I think I'd rather have performance go too far as opposed to not far enough. I think I've waffled on this opinion, but like in the end, if you can make a keyboard too sensitive, that's kind of cool because then you can tune it down to exactly where you want it, what the perfect sensitivity is for you. Maybe that super high sensitivity is what you're looking for somehow and it works. Not the case with me, I'd have to tune it down. But I will say as far as performance goes on this, if we're giving it a direct comparison to the Wooting 60HE, just like before, especially with how stable the keys are and the typing sound and feel, this just clearly wins. However, the Wooting 60HE V2 is coming out this year and there were a ton of improvements they made on the Wooting 80HE, so I'm very curious to see how something like this stacks up against that, given that this comes in around $69 and sometimes on sale down to $60, and the Wooting is probably going to be close to $200. And that comes my overall impressions of this keyboard, and they are actually quite positive. I wasn't sure about this at first. It was just like, oh, this is a 60%, it's very boring, it's very bare bones, it's not my favorite layout. But actually coming back to this, the switches feel very good. Like it's a very precise, positive experience as far as using these keys and keycaps. Like the keycaps don't feel cheap at all. There's enough of an audible response on these keys where it's satisfactory. It's not too loud, it's not too quiet. I'd say it leans on like the creamier side of clack, not too thocky. It's just a very satisfying, inoffensive sound in my opinion. You can form your opinions in the sound test here in a bit. But overall, if you're looking for a very bare bones, yet high performing, well built, nice sounding and feeling keyboard for under $75, and you want that small 60 form factor, I gotta give this a full recommendation. In comparison to something like the, let's say, Aula Win68HE Max that I had, that would come about $45-50 on AliExpress. This feels miles and miles better. Like I would justify spending $15 to $20 more on this for the higher quality, as far as the keycaps, sound considerations, typing feel, and sound. Performance-wise, yeah, there's not gonna be much of a difference. In reality, all these keyboards are gonna perform well enough for 99.9% of us who are plebs and not competitive gamers, and those competitive gamers are good enough that they're gonna outshine any slight deficiencies in their keyboards with their pure skill and game, in my opinion. Which brings me, I think, to one more point I have about keyboards here. Like, yeah, you can get the best performance, the lowest latency, but I think a lot of it comes down to, is the performance good enough for you? Does it perform very well? Like, does it have solid specs? It doesn't have to be absolutely freaking crazy. And can you combine that with a nice typing feel feel, sound, layout, and just overall aesthetic that you really find pleasing in a keyboard. I think hitting a checkbox in all of those aspects is very key. And in reality, we sometimes get too caught up in the small technicalities and tiny little numbers of performance. So I will say that that sound test was a bit clackier on the microphone than it comes through to me in real life, but overall it's not an offensive sound. It's not the cleanest I've ever heard, but it didn't bother me in any way, shape, or form. And it's overall in line with my feeling on this keyboard. It's very good for the price, it performs very well. There's nothing really on the negative side, and it feels like a solid pickup for me at the price for the performance. With that, please subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. Follow me on X at DasherZach. Check out my Discord server and the MouseCast podcast. And with that, we'll see you.